Alright guys, so in this top left hand you see I get a nice suited rundown with 4 Broadway cards and the pocket jacks. I'm going to raise this one up for value to try to build a pot, and I'm actually going to flop a gut shot and a flush draw. So with that I can potentially just continue my C betting range to try to maximize if a flush card hits. Alright, so we're just waiting on this other guy to call. So as you can see, the flop comes really nice. We actually have blockers with the jacks, so we can strictly just bet this as if we're flopped a straight with it. Half pot might actually be a little too weak. Probably should have came in for like $6 or even just a full pot. You can see I get a call here, and on the turn I hit my flush. This is a really good card for me. I don't want to give it away, so I kind of check it through. And then here I'm thinking I'm not going to get much value if I just full pot this. Maybe by checking it twice, I can actually disguise my hand. With there being 4 diamond cards on the board, it's likely that I might just be betting the naked ace. So I go ahead and kind of overbet this, kind of making it appear very bluffy. So here you can see the pot bet. I'm not really expecting a call, but I do get it, which is the best case scenario, and I scoop the pot. If I bet through on the turn, he might have been able to get away with it, and I likely would have only made like $9. So now if we bring our attention to the top right board, you can see I hit 5, 6, 8, 9, which is a very nice rundown in the sense that I only have 1 gap card. The 5, 6 is suited, which is nice in position because I can kind of determine the strength of my flush if I actually hit it. So I go ahead and bet it. I'm in position. I really like this pot bet. I don't see anything wrong with it. I do get 1 call and another call. The flop, in my opinion, is very strong in that I hit a full wrap. Any 5, 6, 8, 9 gives me a straight. The 3, the jack, also gives me straights. And all this is 20 outs if no one has a flush draw. You never really know. I go ahead and 2/3 bet this. So it doesn't completely give away my hand, but at the same time it gives me some flexibility and determine what to do. Next, I do get a full check raise. This guy could have anything from sets. He could have anything from an ace flush draw. I'd say that ace 10 with a nut flush draw would actually be the worst case hand for me. I go ahead and flat call it just to determine what to do on the turn if a club or a board pair does come. It's neither of those cards. I still feel I have enough equity to go ahead and call this down, which I do call it, and I hit the full wrap. He only had top 2 pair, no blockers to the flush card, no flushes either. In that sense, I think he kind of went a little too carried away with the 10 jack, and I think I get berated by this guy for the next 15 minutes. But either way, I put it in a hand simulator. I had 60% equity to his 40%. That kind of shows you when it's good to go ahead with 2 pair. I think in early position against my range, it's very flexible. If I did have even just all Broadway cards with the nut flush draw and a 10, I'm pretty sure I'm still a favorite there too. There's a whole lot of range there that has him beat. So I think in that sense, he probably shouldn't have check raised. He probably should have just called me, pop at the turn, and I think he could have saved himself $15 to $20 when the river card came what it did. So that's that hand. Alright, so here on the top right again, I'm about to get a suited ace hand in the button. Suited ace, 3 rundown cards, gapped from the ace. While it's an okay hand, the rundown is low enough that it has the potential to get into trouble for the exact case you're going to see here. And I also have 3 clubs, so it's not the strongest hand. There is a raise. Actually, I think I just flat his raise. Nothing seems wrong with this. Yeah, I think about potting, and then I decide not to. I just flat it. We're in the same guy who's been fuming at me for the past 10 minutes about the hand just shown. So I think that gives us good implied odds. And he folds. So it's just me and the original pre-flop raiser. This flop is dynamic enough that he could have a lot of gut shots here. He could have a lot of top pairs and flush draws. He doesn't full pot it, so I don't automatically give him credit for the 10 jack. I feel like the bottom straight here is good. And then I turn the clubs. He pots it again, which based on his flop bet, I didn't really think he might have had the 10 jack. The river is a blank, which doesn't change much, and he all-ins. Here I'm really confused what he might have. Since the pot was what was it, 30, 32, 34, and he bet 24 on the river, I feel like I have good bluff catchers. But that's kind of goes back to the point where low rundowns can get you in the case where you get in a lot of straight over straight situations and might actually end up being negative EV in the long run. So I don't know how I completely feel about that play, but I do end up losing $35 right after the guy was assumed I was a huge idiot. So that kind of also showed that I may be a huge idiot. So it gives me an interesting table image that ends up working in my favor later on. But that hand, I did end up catching a nice cooler. After looking at the hand again, he did have the straight flush draw, which is probably why he didn't bet it automatically. I don't really know if there's anything else to do there. Probably just pay him off. I think the majority of the time our straight is probably actually winning on that board. So even though we lose there, probably 60, 55% of the time, our straight's actually good, and it ends up being a positive EV long run. Not really sure on that. That's just my just my opinion on the situation. All right, so next we have two hands that are kind of happening back to back. I want to talk about them independently. At the bottom left, I have King, Queen, 9-7, suited spades. It's not the greatest hand, but I'm in the blind, so I have decent odds to call the flop. I do flop the King High Flush, which seems okay. I think about betting it, but I don't really like the bet. I go ahead and just check call it to try to exercise some pot control. The original raiser does bet it. He only half pots it. To me, this looks like a really weak bet, so I'm just going to check call him down. A lot of people make this play with aces when they do not actually have the suited ace. So he either has it or he has the naked ace with ace XX. Maybe the other ace is suited. I still don't like his weak bets here because if I had a set, I would be getting really cheap flush draws. So I just check him down with the intention to keep this small if I am losing, or to potentially win a medium-sized pot if I am winning. I don't really... I feel he does have the naked ace the whole time, but he actually shows that he has the flush. So, again, this is another one of those situations where it may just be 50-50 long-term call, but I go ahead and continue to call him down and lose the medium-sized pot where he actually does show up with the aces. In that case, again, it's just another cooler. These things happen in Omaha. Some days you lose to all the coolers. Some days you are the one that gets all the coolers. So I think long-term it evens out, and the best thing to do is in those situations, just maximize your wins and minimize your losses. So we're going to go into the next hand, which if you actually saw on the top left, it was going on. But here on the top left, we're going to end up getting it's an okay rundown. It's double suited hand. I'm on the button. I tend to play a little more aggressively on the button, or loosely on the button, I guess. So I like my hands. I definitely like playing these kind of hands on the button since it gives me a lot of flexibility in what I do. I could have raised it, but I decided to just limp it because the gaps aren't that strong. So there is a raise from the big blind. I'm not always huge fans of those, but I do call it down. I actually flop, in my opinion, beautifully. I have the open ender. I have a strong flush draw. Again, I'm really only losing to a pair with a nut flush draw, which with this half pot, I don't really give him credit for that. Again, it looks like a weak bet. I feel like I have enough equity that I'm okay winning the pot right here, or I'm at least a favorite against a two pair. So I do full raise them just to try to get it in immediately, get the SPRs down. This guy's also deep stacked. I may have considered that a little bit more. At this point in time, I just jam it. I think this is the wrong play. I should have just flatted it to see what the turn was and pushed it in the turn if it didn't pair the board. Because as we can see here, the turn did pair the board. He shows me the jacks, and I'm kind of in a bad spot. If I flatted his bet, it could have gave me a lot more strength in minimizing my loss there, like I just talked about in the last hand. And overall, I think that was probably a bad play. But running the numbers, I'm 43% to win. Against his specific holdings, he's 56% to win because he does block my queen. In that hand, I also did have live backdoor clubs, which adds an extra like 3% equity most of the time. So again, another one of those situations where it could go either way. Alright, so now we're 2 hours into the session. You can see my stacks on the tables are looking a little better than they did after those last two hands, and I'm going to get suited aces in the small blind. I really hate aces in Omaha in general. I also really hate it in the small blind. You can see early position raises. I think 2 or 3 people are going to call this, which is going to let me actually build a stack to lower the SPR ratios and actually get these aces in reasonably strong, I think, especially if it's just heads up. So I quickly pop this, hoping to isolate against the original preflop laser. We're going to see he thinks about it, and I think I get 4 callers here, which aces early position 4 callers really weak in Omaha, but under the certain situation, I kind of flop interestingly. I end up with a gutter, top pair, and the aces. I think I have enough of this that I can kind of continue with a little bit of a bet. One person only has 21, the other person only has 40. So I go with a little more than half pot to kind of commit people. And you're going to see the original preflop laser just jam. He ends up getting it in with a pretty strong hand. He has the king and he has the clubs. I like his play here. Because he does have 2 pair outs, he does have live clubs. He kind of berated me a little bit in the sense like he assumed that he automatically should have won that hand. I ran it in the simulator and I ended up seeing that in that specific spot, my aces against his kings, I was 45% and he was 55%. Because of the pot that was already in the middle and because of the bet I had, I believe we both made the right play at that. And in that certain situation, I want to break it down because since I did have the top pair, I figured it would be really hard for someone to commit unless they had like a really low set in that situation. Like they shouldn't have a set of 2s or 3s there ever. King seems a little hard to believe that it's there because I do have a king, so I'm blocking the top set. I'm not blocking any of the flushes, so I feel like if someone calls me, it's likely they're just going to have a flush, the flush draw, in which case I should definitely be the favorite there. So I think that's why I was inclined to bet on the flop. He actually had the perfect hand to go all in with. He had the top pair, he had the flush draw. And again, it should have been... He should have had better equity than he actually had, but since I had the ace king and he had a king jack, if a king ends up landing on the turn, then I have a better kicker. If he ends up hitting his 2 pair, then I can counterfeit his 2 pair with a 5. I can also counterfeit his 2 pair with an ace. So because of the fact that I actually did have the king along with my aces, that made me more inclined to bet the flop. If I had the aces with no king and just the gut shot, I probably would be more inclined to check fold there. I haven't actually ran the numbers, but hold on. I'm going to do that right now. Alright, we're back. I just reran it through the simulator, and it was 46-54. He was the favorite in the hand, but with the money in the middle, that didn't really matter that much. Again, if I had the queen instead of the king, it ends up being 41-59. That gives him an actual, like, a 10% swing in the hand, so it means he's likely to win that hand 1 in 10 times more in the long run if I didn't have the king. So that's why I bet the flop and committed like I did. And I still think that's the correct play in the long run, since it did end up being a coin flip situation against probably the worst hand I could have had against me, given that it's likely no one's going to have 2s, no one's going to have 3s. King 3 is also an unlikely holding, and the kings, I'm blocking one of the king, so it would be a really unlucky situation if the original preflop laser did have kings. And again, if you did have kings and not the club draw, that ends up being, well, 75-24. And the way it was bet, there was 54 in the middle. I bet 20. He re-raised 20. maybe not 54 in the middle, kind of just spitting out numbers. But then I do have the correct about 4-1 odds to call his re-raise. So interesting hand, ends up working in my favor, and we end up finishing the session up $180, even with those 2 unlucky coin flops I broke down earlier in this video. All right, that's it. Thank you. Have a good day. Good luck at the tables. Hope you guys learned something. Peace.